the enormous alien cruiser floated silently above the Earth's atmosphere. It was sleek, designed for speed, with dark, gleaming panels and sharp angles that screamed menace. The ship, a construction of incredible technology from a race known as the HFY, had come to Earth for a very specific reason: the capture of human children. The HFY had been studying humans for years, fascinated by the species' endless adaptability and unpredictable nature. However, there was one thing that they hadn't anticipated: humans were a bit more resilient and clever than they ever gave credit for. The ship's crew, a collection of elite soldiers and tacticians, was led by a towering being named HFY, an officer known for his ruthlessness and efficiency. He stood at the helm, gazing out of the viewport at the planet below, pondering his next move. They had made contact with Earth months ago, and their mission had been simple: abduct human children, bring them aboard the cruiser, and learn from them. But as HFY mulled over the mission, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He had expected the children to be easier to capture. They were just children, after all. But they hadn't anticipated human tenacity. Meanwhile, far below on Earth, the children were completely unaware of the looming danger above them. Most of them were in a small, seemingly ordinary school in a remote town in the Midwest. The town was quiet, quaint, an idyllic setting. The school, a small red brick building with ivy creeping up its walls, was where the trouble began. Jacob Thompson was an 11-year-old boy who didn't think much of anything. He had a penchant for daydreaming, his head often in the clouds, far away from the mundane problems of school. He sat in the classroom, staring out of the window as the teacher droned on about geography. Jacob's mind wandered to his favorite subject, space. He had always been fascinated by the stars, and recently, he had been reading up on UFO sightings and alien encounters. He never would have believed that his own school was about to become ground zero for a real extraterrestrial crisis. In the same classroom, his best friend, Maya, was busy doodling in her notebook. Maya was much more practical than Jacob. She had an analytical mind and often came up with solutions to problems that no one else could figure out. She was the kind of person who made sure every detail was accounted for, and when she wasn't drawing or daydreaming herself, she was reading or researching something. Unlike Jacob, who was lost in his imagination, Maya often found herself puzzled by the fact that the two of them had never encountered anything extraordinary in their small town. Until today. Suddenly, an eerie hum filled the room. Jacob looked up from his window just in time to see a shadow descending from the sky. The school's windows rattled, and the teacher, Mrs. Cooper, looked startled. The students didn't know what to make of the noise at first, but Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had seen this before, in one of his UFO books. "Everyone, get under your desks. Now!" Mrs. Cooper shouted. The classroom erupted into chaos. Kids scrambled to obey, but there was a palpable sense of confusion. Outside, the sky turned an unnatural shade of purple, and something massive blocked out the sun. HFY's ship hovered above, its silent, terrifying presence now fully visible to the students below. "We are the HFY," the leader's voice boomed, a harsh metallic sound. His voice crackled through the speakers they had deployed across the schoolyard. "We have come for your children. Do not resist. Any resistance will result in your extinction." The words echoed through the school like a death sentence. Panic erupted in the classroom. The students screamed, some bolting for the exit, others cowering in fear. Jacob felt his heart racing in his chest. His first instinct was to run, but Maya gripped his arm tightly. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. She didn't look frightened, she looked focused. Determined. The alien soldiers advanced, cutting down any escape route with ease. Their weapons, though silent, were clearly designed to subdue and capture, not to kill. It was as if they were playing a game. To them, human life was expendable, and they were simply hunting prey. "What do we do?" Jacob asked, his voice shaky. "We hide, for now," Maya said firmly. "And we wait for an opening." They ducked under the desk as the door to the classroom burst open with a loud crash. An alien soldier entered, his glowing green eyes scanning the room. His presence was suffocating, the power of his race radiating in the air. But Maya, thinking quickly, grabbed a book off the shelf next to them. She flung it towards the soldier, distracting him long enough for Jacob to grab a fire extinguisher from the corner of the room. In one swift motion, Jacob yanked the pin from the extinguisher and sprayed the soldier with the thick foam. The alien let out a screech, his glowing eyes flickering for a moment. But instead of retreating, the soldier growled and raised his weapon. But just as he was about to fire, Maya acted again. She sprinted across the room, grabbing a nearby chair and hurling it at the soldier's head. It didn't knock him out, but it distracted him long enough for the two kids to escape the classroom. They ran through the hallways, dodging the aliens that now patrolled the school, trying to find any place to hide. The building, once so familiar and safe, had become a maze of terror. Jacob looked at Maya, who was ahead of him, always thinking, always planning. Despite the danger, he realized just how lucky he was to have her by his side. "We need to find a way to get to the basement," Maya said, turning sharply down a hallway. "There's a backup generator there. If we can get to it, we might be able to turn off the power, which will disrupt their technology." The plan was risky, but it was the only one they had. But just as they turned a corner, they were stopped dead in their tracks. A towering Nari warrior blocked their path. His glowing green eyes narrowed as he regarded the children. "You cannot escape," he rumbled, stepping forward, his armored boots shaking the ground. "You are ours now." Jacob's heart raced. This was it. They were trapped. But then Maya did something unexpected. She grinned. "You know," she said with surprising calm, "we humans have a tendency to surprise people." The alien warrior raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. Jacob could barely believe what was happening, but Maya was already pulling a metal pipe from the nearby wall. She swung it with precision, and the soldier's eyes widened in shock. In that moment, the alien faltered, just enough for Jacob to sprint past him and dash toward the basement door. "Run!" Maya shouted, following close behind. The basement door slammed shut behind them, the heavy thud of it reverberating in the silence. Jacob and Maya stood in the small, dimly lit room, their breath coming in short gasps. The noise from the chaos upstairs, screams, shouts, and the eerie hum of the alien technology, seemed so distant now, as though they had entered another world entirely. Their sudden descent into the depths of the school had given them a temporary reprieve, but the danger was far from over. Jacob's heart was still pounding in his chest, but his eyes darted around the basement, searching for something, anything, that could help them escape. There was an old utility cabinet against the far wall, its doors slightly ajar, and a stack of metal crates in one corner. The dim light cast long shadows, and the faint hum of electrical equipment hummed somewhere in the background. "Okay," Maya said, her voice low but steady. "The power's our only shot. If we can cut it off, their technology might glitch. We'll have a chance to get the upper hand." Jacob looked at her, trying to shake the nervousness from his mind. "And if we can't?" Maya didn't answer right away. She was already pacing toward the cabinet, her mind working a mile a minute. "Then we need to figure something else out. Fast. Do you think they're, following us?" Jacob asked, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. The basement felt like a tomb, empty and cold. But the question lingered in the air between them, unspoken and heavy. The thought of being hunted was terrifying. "They're probably coming. But they don't know we're down here yet. This place is hidden enough, at least for now." Jacob swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he felt any better. His mind kept racing back to the alien warrior who had blocked their escape route. The warrior's eerie green eyes had burned into his soul, and his voice, like gravel scraping against stone, still echoed in Jacob's mind. Maya was already pulling open the utility cabinet, rifling through its contents. "We need to get to the control room, just past here," she said, tossing aside old cleaning supplies and electrical wires. "The backup generator's there. If we can cut it off, it might disable their tech. Jacob's eyes widened. You know how to do that? I've read about it, she said with a shrug. I've been reading a lot about electrical grids, backup systems, all that boring stuff. She paused. The aliens won't expect kids to know anything about this. Jacob blinked, momentarily stunned by how calm Maya seemed. If he'd been in her shoes, he would have been a trembling mess by now. Instead, she was laser-focused, her mind already a few steps ahead of their predicament. They reached the far corner of the basement, where the control room door stood, half hidden behind a tangle of exposed pipes and storage boxes. Maya pulled out a small flashlight from her backpack and flicked it on, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. Jacob followed her, his eyes darting around, staying alert for any sign of movement. We need to make this fast, Maya whispered. Every second we waste is another second they're getting closer. Jacob nodded, his stomach churning with nerves. The sound of their footsteps on the concrete floor seemed deafening in the otherwise still basement. It was as if the world was holding its breath. When they reached the control room door, Maya knelt in front of it and started to fiddle with the lock. It's a manual lock, she muttered, her hands working quickly. Should have been simple, but of course, it's not. Jacob's fingers twitched as he heard the faint hum of alien voices rising above the rest of the noise. They were close. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, the unmistakable sense of being hunted. He peered back through the shadows but saw nothing. Maya's hands froze as she felt the lock click. Got it, she whispered excitedly. She pushed the door open slowly, a creak of metal on metal breaking the quiet of the room. Inside, the control room was eerily cold, and the air smelled faintly of ozone, a sign of the alien technology at work. Banks of computer consoles flickered in the low light, and monitors displayed a network of symbols that Jacob couldn't begin to understand. But Maya, of course, knew exactly what she was looking for. Over there, she said, pointing to a large panel against the far wall, filled with dials and switches. That's the generator. Jacob felt his pulse quicken as he followed her toward the panel. What do we need to do? We need to deactivate the entire system, Maya said, already studying the switches. If I can cut the power to the backup generator, it'll overload the system. Jacob nodded, trying not to let the pressure get to him. He glanced back at the door, but nothing moved. Still, he could sense it, the building anticipation, the feeling that they were running out of time. Maya moved swiftly, her fingers dancing across the switches with surprising skill. She twisted a dial here, pressed a button there. The low hum of the room grew louder, and the air itself felt charged. Jacob's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Maya. Before he could finish, a loud crash rang out from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots pounding the floors. The aliens had found them. Maya's eyes went wide, but she didn't hesitate. With a final, swift turn of the dial, she hit the last switch, and the entire room plunged into darkness. The humming sound stopped, replaced by the silence of a power failure. The flickering lights in the control room died, and the once constant buzz of alien technology ceased. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the doors to the control room burst open. The CH-Nari soldiers were here. They had found them. The sound of the CH-Nari soldiers' footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway outside the control room. Jacob and Maya's breaths were shallow, their bodies frozen in the eerie silence of the darkened basement. The heavy hum of alien technology was gone, replaced by the tense stillness that made every movement feel like it would betray them. The moment they had deactivated the backup generator, they knew it wouldn't take long for the aliens to notice. Jacob's mind raced. The power was down, and for now, the aliens were scrambling to regain control. The momentary victory, turning off their technology, was a gift. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't going to stop the soldiers from coming after them. The question was how long they could stay hidden in the dark, waiting for a break. Maya. What now? Jacob whispered, his voice a strained whisper. Maya didn't answer right away. She was crouched beside the control panel, her fingers nervously drumming against the edge of the desk. Her eyes flickered between the darkened door and the dim light of the flashlight she held. The beam barely cut through the dark, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. "We need to move," she finally said. Her voice was determined, but there was a flicker of anxiety beneath it. "We've bought ourselves some time, but that won't last long. The soldiers are already recalibrating. It's only a matter of minutes before they figure out how to restore power." Jacob nodded, swallowing hard. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable weight that pressed against his chest. He had no idea how they were going to escape, but he trusted Maya. She was the one with the plan. She always had a plan. Before either of them could move, the door to the control room creaked open. Not the heavy, dramatic crash they'd expected, but a slow, deliberate opening, as if someone was carefully testing the darkness before entering. Jacob's stomach lurched, and his heart skipped a beat. His first instinct was to run, but Maya held her hand up, signaling for him to stay still. Two CHNARI soldiers stepped into the room, their glowing green eyes scanning the area. The darkness seemed to swallow them whole, making them appear even more intimidating. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as one of the soldiers moved closer to the control panel, his long, metallic fingers brushing against the surface. "They know," Maya whispered under her breath. "They know we're here." Jacob's mind raced, looking for a way out. The door was still open, but the soldiers were too close. And there was no way around them. The only thing left to do was hide. "Get behind the desk," Maya hissed. They moved quickly, crouching low to the ground as the soldiers continued to scan the room. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, each beat feeling louder than the last. He pressed himself against the cold metal, trying to make himself as small as possible. His breath was ragged, and he tried to slow it down, praying that the aliens wouldn't hear him. Maya's hand brushed against his, a subtle reminder that they were still in this together. Jacob squeezed her hand in return, grateful for the reassurance. They were both scared out of their minds, but at least they had each other. The soldiers advanced further into the room, their long limbs extending unnaturally as they searched the shadows. One of them stepped toward the desk, just a few feet away from where Jacob and Maya crouched. The tension in the air was unbearable. Jacob could hear the soldiers' slow, deliberate movements. His eyes were locked on the spot where they'd been standing moments before. Then, with a sudden hiss, one of the soldiers turned toward the dark corner of the room. "It's here," the soldier murmured, the words harsh and alien, his voice amplified by the strange communication device they wore. The other soldiers' heads snapped up, their attention momentarily drawn away. Maya didn't waste any time. In that split second of distraction, she grabbed Jacob's arm and pulled him toward the back of the room. They moved silently, like shadows themselves, weaving between the scattered equipment and storage crates. "Go!" Maya whispered, her voice tight with urgency. They darted toward the far wall where an emergency exit led to a narrow service hallway. Jacob's legs burned with the effort of moving fast, but the adrenaline kept him going. They were almost there when one of the soldiers spun around, his glowing green eyes locking onto them with terrifying accuracy. "Found you," the soldier growled, raising his weapon. The metallic whine of the weapon filled the air as the soldier aimed it at them. Without thinking, Jacob threw himself forward, slamming into Maya to push her out of the line of fire. The blast of energy missed them by inches, but the force of it sent them both tumbling to the ground. "Get up!" Maya cried, pulling Jacob to his feet. The soldier raised the weapon again, but this time, Jacob didn't hesitate. He grabbed a loose pipe from the nearby shelf and swung it at the soldier with all his might. The pipe connected with a loud clang, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The alien stumbled back, dazed, as the other soldier advanced, but Maya was already ahead of him. She grabbed a metal rod and swung it like a bat, knocking the weapon out of the second soldier's hand. "Move," she shouted, shoving Jacob toward the hallway. They sprinted into the narrow corridor, the sound of alien pursuit following them. The hall was dimly lit, barely enough to see, but Jacob and Maya moved with an urgency they hadn't known before. They rounded corners, ducked into service rooms, and pressed themselves against walls as the CH soldiers' footsteps grew louder and closer. Jacob's mind raced with every turn, trying to stay ahead of the soldiers, trying to stay alive. He glanced at Maya, who was leading the way, her face set with determination. "How much farther?" he panted, struggling to keep up. "Not far," Maya called back. "There's a way out near the back of the school. We can't stop now." They were nearing the end of the hall when the sound of the alien soldiers echoed again, closer than before. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, but as they rounded the final corner, they saw it, a small door leading to the outside. The exit was just ahead, but it was locked. Maya cursed under her breath. She pulled out a small toolkit from her bag, she had thought ahead, and began to work quickly on the lock. Come on," she muttered, her fingers moving with precision. "We can't let them catch us now." The door clicked open with a soft sound, and Maya threw it wide. "Go, now," she yelled. Jacob didn't need to be told twice. They both bolted through the door, out into the cold, dark night. But as they ran, they could hear the unmistakable sound of alien boots behind them. The CH soldiers were still after them. The real fight had only just begun. The cold night air bit at Jacob's skin as he and Maya sprinted across the schoolyard. The ground beneath their feet seemed to blur as they ran, their breath visible in the chilling darkness. Their only thought was escape, get as far away from the CH soldiers as possible. But every time they thought they were getting away, they could hear the unmistakable pounding of alien boots, always a few steps behind. The pursuit was relentless, their every move watched by an unseen enemy. "We need to keep moving," Maya called over her shoulder, urging Jacob forward. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep running. The adrenaline that had fueled them for so long was starting to wear thin. His legs felt like lead, his lungs burning for air. The school's campus stretched before them, vast and dark, and yet the shadows seemed to hide dangers at every turn. It was as if the whole world was closing in. A burst of light suddenly illuminated the area, and the ground beneath their feet rumbled. A low mechanical whine filled the air, signaling the CH ships overhead. They had been hunting them from above, using advanced sensors to track their every move. The faint glow of the ship's searchlights danced across the grass, casting long, sinister shadows on the ground. "Maya, we can't outrun them," Jacob gasped, his chest tightening as he stumbled on his feet. "Not with that attitude, we can't." Maya shot back, her eyes darting around, scanning the area for something, anything, that could help them. Her mind was working frantically, trying to come up with a plan, any plan. They were close to the edge of the campus, where a dense forest stretched out before them, dark and inviting. Maya's eyes locked onto the tree line. "That's our best shot. The trees will hide us long enough to break their pursuit." But before they could move, the searchlights from the CH ship suddenly swung their way, blinding them with their intensity. The alien soldiers, still behind them, were nearly upon them now, their footsteps faster, their weapons drawn. "Run!" Maya screamed, and without another word, they darted into the forest, the trees closing in around them like a dark fortress. The forest was dense, the ground uneven with roots and underbrush. Jacob's feet tangled in the thick vegetation, and every time he glanced back, the searchlights grew closer. The sound of the soldiers' voices, distorted through their translation devices, floated through the night air, their alien language sending shivers down his spine. They pushed forward, deeper into the woods, until the light from the ship above was nearly gone. For a moment, they slowed, panting for air, their backs pressed against the rough bark of a tree. The forest had swallowed them up, and for the first time since they had been chased from the school, Jacob felt a flicker of hope. Maya, however, was far from satisfied. She scanned the woods around them, looking for any sign of movement, any clue as to where the CH soldiers might be. "We're not safe yet," she said, her voice tight. "We need to keep moving. There's no way we can fight them head-on, but I think I have an idea." Jacob raised an eyebrow, still catching his breath. "You have an idea?" Maya nodded, determination in her eyes. We'll need to use the terrain to our advantage. The CH-Nari are built for power, but they're not good at maneuvering in tight spaces. The trees will make it harder for their ships to track us, but we have to act fast. Jacob's pulse quickened. What do we do? We need to make noise. Disrupt their senses, get them disoriented, Maya explained. We can't outrun them, but we can confuse them long enough to get the upper hand. How? Jacob asked, still unsure of the plan. Maya grinned, her eyes gleaming in the dim light of the forest. I've been waiting for this. With a few swift movements, she began to gather sticks, rocks, and anything else she could find on the ground. Jacob, still trying to catch his breath, followed her lead. As they worked quickly, Maya explained the plan. We'll make a series of traps and distractions. A few noisemakers, some simple snares, nothing too complicated. We're going to force them to play our game. By the time they were done, they had set up a small network of crude traps, with strategically placed rocks, branches, and even a few firecrackers Maya had found in her backpack. Maya crouched beside Jacob, her eyes focused on the path they had just cleared. When they get close, we trigger the traps. It'll cause enough of a diversion that we can slip past them. But we have to be quiet. If they hear us, they'll know exactly where we are. Jacob nodded, feeling a surge of both fear and excitement. It was a risky move, but it was their only shot. They had no other choice. Minutes passed in tense silence as they waited. Jacob's ears strained to hear any sign of movement, any hint that the aliens were closing in. His mind raced with thoughts of escape. What if this didn't work? What if the CH-Nari were too powerful, too smart? Finally, a faint rustling broke the silence. Jacob froze. His heart was in his throat. They're here, Maya whispered, her hand clenched around a small rock. Get ready. The footsteps grew louder, more distinct. The aliens were closing in. Jacob could hear their voices now, speaking in their harsh, guttural tongue. They were just moments away. Maya nodded to him. Now. Jacob threw the rock he had been holding with all his might. It landed with a loud crack, bouncing off a tree a few yards away. At the same time, Maya triggered the firecrackers, sending a shower of sparks and noise into the air. The CH-Nari soldiers paused, disoriented by the noise. They turned in the direction of the sound, but the trees were thick, their searchlights useless in the dense forest. The disorientation worked, just long enough for Jacob and Maya to slip through the trees. They ran harder now, knowing the moment of advantage wouldn't last long. They could hear the CH-Nari soldiers growling in frustration, but they weren't fast enough to catch them. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps as they pushed deeper into the woods, their legs burning with the strain. Eventually, after what felt like hours of running, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. They didn't stop running, not even when they thought they had finally lost the CH-Nari. They didn't stop until the forest cleared, and they found themselves on the outskirts of a nearby town. Panting, exhausted, and bruised, they finally slowed. The lights of the town were in the distance, a beacon of safety. We did it, Jacob gasped, looking at Maya, his voice hoarse. Maya didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, a look of exhaustion and relief crossing her face. We're not out of danger yet, she said quietly, her eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. But we've survived. And as long as we keep our wits about us, we will keep surviving. Jacob looked at her, admiration swelling in his chest. Maya had led them through impossible odds, and they were still alive. They had a chance, and in the face of such overwhelming odds, that was more than enough. You know, Jacob said with a small grin, I think we're starting to figure out how to beat these aliens after all. Maya smiled, though her eyes remained sharp, always watching. One step at a time. And together, with their resourcefulness, their determination, and their unshakable bond, they knew that no matter how many CH-Nari came after them, they were ready for whatever came next.